Welcome back to IGN's History of Awesome, a year-by-year breakdown of big events that shape pop culture. Today we're covering 2005, the year Microsoft launched the Xbox 360 and gained ground on Sony. Not to be outdone, PlayStation gave gamers a sense of what it was like to be truly small in Shadow of the Colossus, the mainstream learned Christopher Nolan's name with the release of Batman Begins, and George Lucas wrapped up his prequel trilogy with Star Wars Revenge of the Sith. Let's get this discussion started.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to IGN's History of Awesome. I'm your host for the year 2005, Justin Davis. I'm joined by Ryan McCaffrey.
Hello.
Terry Schwartz.
Hi.
And Marty Sleva.
Welcome.
Ryan, we're going to kick off talking about something that's near and dear to your heart. I mean, all of us, but you specifically, is the launch of the Xbox 360. It was
what a machine.
November 22nd, 2005. It launched in a $299 version, which we'll talk about in a sec, but really it was that $399 version that everybody was after.
Yeah. This was a machine, the launch of the HD era. I literally went out and bought an HD TV months in advance, knowing that this was coming, that the games were going this way, console games. And I'll tell you what, there was no killer app the way that there was with the original Xbox for Halo. But unlike the original Xbox where it was Halo and everything else,
Right.
the launch lineup for the 360 is, I would argue, maybe the best overall launch lineup. So some highlights include Call of Duty 2, which was when that was the game that really sort of started to launch that series to superstardom. Project Gotham Racing 3, which was fantastic. Cameo, which I will defend, underrated. That was, that was rare.
It's like a fine C game.
Yep.
And then you had
Perfect Dark Zero.
Perfect Dark Zero, which was not super great.
Sure.
Kind of curious and interesting.
Yeah.
But then Condemned: Criminal Origins, still one of my favorite underrated launch games. It's just a really solid lineup from day one on this console.
Peter Jackson's King Kong the movie, the game.
Not a launch title.
Yeah, it was.
No, it was not.
Ooh. I got it for that Christmas.
Bet you money. It came out in December near the movie.
Interesting.
That makes more sense. I just lost so much money.
To me, even though, like you said, there was no
Easy
sort of
1,000 gamer score, by the way. All you had to do was finish the campaign. Sorry, go ahead.
There was no sort of killer app game. There was no one game. I got to get a 360 to play this. But really, to me, the killer app of the 360 was Xbox Live. I mean, it felt futuristic. And Microsoft's rules for every game has to have a demo. Every game is going to have achievement points that are all sort of baked into this process. A whole downloadable ecosystem with games dropping. I bought games like Galaga and replayed some classics and, Geometry Wars.
Yeah.
To me, that it made that feel like something new and fresh and different than any console that had come before.
And unlike the original Xbox, which launched the year after the PS2, this was the system that launched the year before the PS3 and the Wii. So it was the first one of the generation.
And it's always a risky thing, right?
Yeah.
Like sometimes going first, like in the case of the PS2, very much works in your favor.
Yeah.
Yeah, but other times going first can really, you get leapfrogged that
Wii
next
U.
year.
Saturn.
So it was interesting. I mean, let's talk about some of the ways that, the Xbox 360 came out right in that transition to HD, as you were saying. And that console, when it originally launched, you can see how things changed over time. Famously, that $299 core system had no hard drive in it.
Yeah, you had to buy one of the memory cards, which were, the sort of how console gaming had been for a while, and that was what people were used to. But yeah, or you bought the $400, the premium SKU that had a 20 gig hard drive with 13 gigs of usable space on it.
And it really didn't make sense to buy that first one either by the time you bought everything you needed to get to the point that the $400 one was
Also,
right there.
remember, the 360, I wouldn't quite call it supply constrained. It wasn't quite that. But
it was hard to find for a little while.
Yeah, you couldn't find one until about February. Like it was really tough to get for those first several months.
Yeah, I mean, my memory of the 360, I didn't get one that first year. I got one year later, which I often do with consoles. And I played because in that next year, and we'll talk about it in History of Awesome 2006, but we got Oblivion and Gears of War. And I played those games on an SD TV, which I don't know how I did that.
Terrible idea.
But that was the era. Like HD TVs were fairly common, but lots of homes didn't have them yet. So Microsoft sort of future-proofing that console way back in 2005 to make sure that it was HD ready before there was that many of them in homes was really smart.
The 360 also had what was at the time probably the best overall controller ever. I would say just
it's up there.
Just everything about it was solid. Except its weakness was the D-pad. It had a pretty crappy D-pad.
Yeah.
But it just felt that controller, and it was everything. It was wireless, which had never been done out of the box on a console before as well.
Also, we got a lot of Jay Allard. He was wearing a hoodie and he put a sport coat over
right.
it. Brought that in.
Popularized that look.
Ryan, one of the things that you sort of wanted to bring up was that original Blades dashboard. And that's another thing that maybe people don't remember, is that the Xbox 360, not only did the hardware reinvent itself, but that console looked radically different at launch than it looks and feels if you were to boot one up now.
Which is exactly the same thing that's happening with the Xbox One. I mean, depending on when you watch this video, your Xbox One dashboard might look and feel completely different than when the system launched a year ago. But yeah, the Blades dashboard back before the marketplace was just overflowing with thousands upon thousands of pieces of content across games and TV and film and music. Yeah, it was just these simple blades with, you had your like a system tab, a games tab, a media tab, and you just scrolled through them side to side with the thumbstick to get to what you wanted. It was all very simple, and at the time, very elegant, very quick, very easy to use, and very well liked. It would never work now because it just wouldn't organize things.
Well, it's the first example of, the original Xbox had a dashboard, and you could access, the memory of your GameCube. And every console had some degree of that, every console of that era. But the 360 was the first time that, there was an experience for you to navigate around and, experience outside of putting a game in and playing.
Correct.
In a proper operating system. Xbox 360, even way back then, a very forward-thinking piece of hardware.
Yeah, and the 360, at that time, Microsoft thought its users really wanted customization with everything. You could get the faceplates, which didn't last long. They were $15 each.
Real dumb.
But you could also customize, you could do themes on your dashboard.
Yep, I remember that.
Yeah, you could customize, you could import custom soundtracks into games. Like if you put in an audio CD, it would rip it to the drive, and you could listen to it in games. So there was a big element of customization with the 360 as well.
So we also have to, the interesting thing about the year 2005 is it was the start of that console generation thanks to Xbox, but there were however many PS2s in homes, 100 million plus.
A lot.
And that console just kept on trucking, and that is the year, actually right around the time that the 360 launched, that we got the original Guitar Hero, and the whole revolution that started. Guitar Hero. The interesting thing about the original Guitar Hero is the humble origins of that franchise. There were only 30 songs in the main set list. They were all covers, no original games, because artists didn't want to be involved in that yet at that time.
I forgot about that.
Yeah, it was an impossible sell for Harmonix at that point.
And some of the covers were good, some were not good at all.
Yeah, well, and that's a quick fact too. A lot of people might not realize. They think, oh, Guitar Hero Rock Band. Harmonix invented them both.
Right.
Harmonix invented Guitar Hero. Activision came in and bought the name and Red Octane, the instrument, the peripheral manufacturer as well, and that's where Harmonix went. Okay, we're going to go make Rock Band now. Right.
That's one of the big things that people might not, if they haven't been paying close attention, the history of Guitar Hero is that was indie game success. Harmonix was a small company and Red Octane was a small company, and together they sort of combined forces to make this weird, strange music game based off, a Japanese Konami franchise called Guitar Freaks. So let's bring it to America, put it on consoles. We don't know how this is going to go. And it turned into a multi-billion-dollar franchise that only later companies like Activision would get involved in.
Yeah. And it very much was like a continuation of a Japanese-style arcade game that people brought home. And I think beyond Rock Band, there was like DJ Hero and things like that came out of it. But those were the big ones. It's hard to sort of objectively look back and think of a time where there were only 30 covers in this game because it has taken over. It's been this perfect melding of the music and games.
Yeah, it was a PS2 exclusive. That's still the only way to play the original Rock Band.
Yeah, that was my freshman year of college, and I remember that being almost at every party I went into, someone was playing, Guitar Hero, and then for the next couple of years with Guitar Hero 2 and with Rock Band, no one was ever playing DJ Hero. no one in Wisconsin was doing that.
DJ Hero is actually really good.
It's really good.
Yeah.
Some of the games on the original Guitar Hero soundtrack include, it was very classic rock. It wasn't until later that they would broaden that music pool. It was stuff like Smoke on the Water, Bark at the Moon, I Want to Be Sedated, the Ramones. So there was some more modern stuff like Sum 41, but it was very much like, hope you like classic rock, because that's what we're all about.
Yeah. Sum 41.
All
except for
songs,
Sum 41.
all songs that now to me on Expert would probably seem like child's play
Yeah.
now. Like, oh, Smoke on the Water on Expert,
Yeah.
big deal.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I think one of the brilliant sort of little details about that controller and that experience was tilting the controller vertically to activate star power.
That's right.
Oh, yeah.
So
just
perfect.
just a smart little attention to detail that that sort of turned it up to 11 and
Yeah.
helped that franchise really sort of.
That was a Spinal Tap reference.
Thanks,
you did
Marty.
you did a music thing inside of this. Yeah.
I did it.
Yeah, and now
Very
it's
proud.
funny because the for a long time the sort of the music instrument genre went away, and then this year now all of a sudden we're getting both Rock Band and Guitar Hero are going to come back.
Again, a decade later, they're sort of everything old is new again, and nothing goes away forever.
Yeah,
For better or worse.
and everyone dies alone.
That's why it's good to know the history of awesome. We did it.
Every console
I'm gonna
actually.
go.
Ryan, come back. The show's not over. The GameCube actually had another great game that year too. Every console sort of had its moment to shine, and the GameCube in early January 2005 got Resident Evil 4, and it would come to the PS2 later that year. But for a few months, GameCube owners had this sort of incredible experience.
Yeah, that was one of the Capcom 5. Capcom had this deal for 5 exclusive.
How many of them came out? 3?
Piano 3, this Beautiful Joe.
Yeah, I think that's
Killer
it.
7?
Oh yeah.
No, that
maybe
wasn't a
Killer
Capcom
7.
game.
I don't know.
Yeah, Resident Evil 4 is one of the seminal games of the generation.
Yep.
It really brought the third-person, over-the-shoulder, action game into the forefront, which stuff later like Gears of War ended up cribbing a lot from.
Dead Space,
Yeah.
GTA, mimic that camera style for shooting.
Yeah, and this is probably Mikami's best game as well, which is saying a lot because he made Aladdin. He did,
Which is
and
awesome.
Goof Troop.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing about Resident Evil 4. It was beloved at the time, got incredible reviews, sold really well, but its esteem has only grown in the years since as people sort of figured out how incredible that mixture of horror and action truly was. You're not really fighting enemies, or fighting zombies, rather. These enemies are smart. They'll climb ladders.
Yeah.
They'll leap through windows. They're tenacious.
Yeah. I mean, the first sort of battle in the village where you're like, oh, wait, this is open and dynamic, and there's a dude with a chainsaw and a bag over his head, and this is terrifying. This is not the game that was revealed as Resident Evil 4, though. Resident Evil 4 was originally a Kamiya game, and it was this weird, sort of very linear, spooky phantom dude with a hook.
Yeah, I mean, there's famously a couple different Resident Evil 4s. There's that very traditional one that we saw, with the Hookman that was going to be slow-paced survival horror. And
His name was actually Hookman.
Hookman?
Yeah,
Mr.
Johannes
Hookman.
Hookman.
Dr. Hookman.
Yeah.
And then there was the very, swinging the far in the opposite direction was the very fast-paced, action-oriented Resident Evil that would, morph into Devil May Cry.
Yeah, totally.
And then they landed on was something in between. And what I think is interesting about Resident Evil 4 was, prior to that, horror games had to be, you had to have these slow tank controls, and that was really where the horror came from. And this showed you that you could give your character a lot of power, and a lot of power weapons and rocket launchers and sniper rifles, and still have it be very spooky and scary. That mixture of action and horror was really smart.
You also end the game on a cool jet ski ride, the president's daughter.
As you do.
Yeah, as most games.
Video
end.
games.
Yeah.
I think the only other thing that really that I want to highlight about Resident Evil 4 is just how huge that game was. I didn't know that much about it going in. It was almost like another. We were just talking about Metal Gear Solid 2 in this room a little bit ago, where it sort of surprised you. And I only ever knew about the village. And you're in the village, you're fighting these villagers, and this game has you go to a castle and then you go to a third area. That game just keeps going and going and going, and is much longer and bigger and more epic in scope than I certainly expected going into it.
And it's probably the high point for the franchise as a whole. I think since then, 5 and especially 6 have sort of lost the way.
Yeah.
And people are always wondering, when is this series going to get back on track?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's tough, right? 4 nailed the action so well, and then 5 and 6 are maybe a little bit too action-oriented.
I mean, where do you go after you have a cool jet ski ride with the president's daughter?
I don't know.
Yeah.
You go into...
Cool jet ski ride with the First Lady?
Yeah. Ooh. Michelle Obama. That's our first lady.
I like it. We also saw the original God of War made its debut this year.
Speaking of jet ski rides.
Speaking of jet ski rides, you do Kratos loves those jet skis.
With Medusa?
Yeah, with Medusa. With the Gorgon. Yeah.
Late-ish in the PS2's lifespan. I mean, it's the same year that the 360 came out, right? But God of War and then God of War 2 a year later sort of sustained the PS2 for a little while.
Yeah, and this was an insane, bonkers, over the top. It was almost like it felt like a summer blockbuster in the way that it did scale and scope that games didn't really do. That opening level against the Hydra or the Kraken or whatever.
What a way to open a game.
Like if Ninja Gaiden and Jason and the Argonauts had a baby.
Yeah, totally. And it became one of those huge, high-selling franchises for Sony that went on through the PS2 with God of War 1 and 2, into the PSP, on the PS3, and this is one of those games, the next God of War we know is coming for PS4 at some point, and people are super stoked for it.
I mean, I think it's just so audacious, and just to have the balls to make a game where you're gonna go kill the gods.
Yeah.
And then you do it, and it feels believable. Like you figure out how to take them all down. All those boss fights are sort of kind of interesting puzzles. It was really that epic scope of, it opens with that huge scale Hydra fight and just sort of doesn't ever stop or slow down from there. It was awesome.
Yeah. Kratos is real angry.
Yeah, he was real angry.
Yeah.
And you actually become, spoilers, at the end of God of War, you become the new God of War. You kill, the game is named after Ares, who's, the God of War in Greek myth, and you kill him and take his place on the throne. Like, talk about a way to end a game. Like, it's awesome, right?
In Roman mythology, he's named Mars.
Ooh.
You'll learn. I taught him.
This is now edutainment, is what this is.
God of War is really remembered as, he's got the blades, and he's just stabbing dudes in the eyes, and this really sort of violent, over-the-top action game. But the original God of War actually has a decent amount of puzzles and platforming in it, too.
Yeah.
I think if you go back and play that game now, the game's reputation is different than the reality of it. Like, it's actually a more thoughtful game than I think some people sort of remember God of War for being. It is a really, really sort of brilliant mixture of fast-paced, combo-based action and puzzle solving and platforming.
It was a really good era for 3D character action games with Devil May Cry and Onimusha.
Yeah, Onimusha.
Yeah, Jean Reno was in one of those. That was weird. He likes jet skis.
We actually did get a console launch in the year 2000. What year were you talking about? 2005?
Yeah,
2005 as well.
The
The PSP came out in 2005.
I got one at launch.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, fun.
You got a launch PSP?
Yeah, hook, line, and sinker was just amped for it. I mean, the idea of something. I mean, I had the GBA, or I suppose probably the SP. I'm probably had upgraded to by then, but I was so ready for a potent piece of hardware that could play games portably, and. I remember the best game I played on PSP ever was Grand Theft Auto Liberty City Stories, because it was basically GTA 3 in like a functioning GTA 3 in your pocket. But Luminous of the launch, Luminous was, and still, like I could play Luminous today and have just as much fun. What a puzzle game!
Phenomenal puzzle game.
So good. Tetris is generally considered to be the best puzzle game ever made. I think Luminous is absolutely in that hunt. If someone wants to make an argument for that being the best puzzle game, I totally think that that's a respectable position to take.
It was UMDs was a bad choice.
Yeah, the UMDs. Remember UMD movies?
Yeah, it came with Spider-Man 2.
It's insane, right?
Yeah.
And they tried to sell them in stores, and it was just a weird time with those UMD movies.
I had Batman Begins on UMD.
Did you watch it?
Oh yeah.
Wait, we're going to talk about Batman Begins a little bit.
Because there was no iPhone to watch.
No, that's
to watch it on there at that point. So.
I think, the PSP is one of the last times that I remember a video game truly just kind of blowing my mind, because you have this idea of what portable games are. And the PSP shattered that. Like, I played Twisted Metal, I don't remember the name of it, but whatever the PSP Twisted Metal was, Head On. And it had, real-time online multiplayer, like hop in a lobby, you play that game, and it looked and felt just like the console game, and I'm playing on the go online. And, like, it was the true sort of realization of console quality experience with no compromises on the go. I mean, the PSP didn't end up being a huge success. I mean, it was a modest success.
Mostly in Japan.
Yeah.
But I had a tremendous amount of fun with that console.
I mean, Nintendo really had sort of cornered the market on handheld game systems at that point. So I think the best way to compete with it was to do something completely different. And so you didn't see a lot of crossover between those two systems, but they did.
I mean, it is like how the GBA was almost like a portable Super Nintendo. This was like a portable PS2, which is crazy.
Yeah, very powerful, very sleek. That was one of the first consoles where I remember being just very, very impressed with the way that it looked. And
Absolutely,
felt.
yeah. I remember being, that was back when I used to ride the train to work, a Caltrain, and I remember having it out, playing it, and more than once, people would just kind of come over and just be like wowed by this thing. Because again, remember, this is pre-smartphone.
Gigantic screen.
It was just like, it was a really impressive piece of hardware just to look at.
Yeah, another really sharp piece of industrial design for sure. Very sort of Apple-esque, I guess you could almost call it. Another PS2 game, sort of a dark horse game that came out that year, was Shadow of the Colossus.
You ride a horse in that game. But he's a real nice horse.
Yeah,
But he's not dark, though.
No, he passes away at one point, but he comes back.
Spoilers.
Oh yeah, spoilers.
I said he comes back.
Marty, what makes Shadow of the Colossus so special that it's a game we're still talking about a decade later?
Well, first off, Team Eco still hasn't made a game since then in 10 years. It is special because it takes what they did with the original Eco, which was this really gorgeous, painterly, methodical show don't tell sort of story, and it adds a massive sense of awe and wonder to it. I just love the fact that this game begins and you're this nameless dude on a horse, and you have this sleeping princess who might be dead, and you don't know if this is a love interest or your sister or what's going on. And like you said, like the audacity of something with God of War, like this game, the only mission in this game is to find these 16 beasts that aren't really doing anything aside from just existing and chilling, and you just have to murder each one. And you just have to literally kill each one, and you're sort of like this
it's like
evil
a puzzle to figure it out how to beat each one.
Yeah, and the sense of scale and scope, and the fact that you're climbing on its back and grabbing its hair and stabbing it in the eyeball.
I love the kind of story decision or design decision that these colossi aren't like wrecking up villages or like killing people or stomping on things. Like some of them are literally asleep.
Yeah.
And then like you pick a fight with them, and then it like, if you're playing the game just sort of mindlessly, you wouldn't think about it. But if you stop and take a step back, you're like, am I the bad guy?
That's the question by the end, too.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
that's what the game is challenging you to ask yourself. And it's like this real subversion of the Zelda tropes, right? It takes everything about those. It has the same general world if you take a step back, but everything you do is the opposite of what you would do in Zelda. And I think for a really long time, I mean, less so in recent years, but that was the game, if you were talking about video games as art, that you would point to. You would like, this is challenging storytelling and innovative storytelling and just beautiful. And I think that's why it's still beautiful. You know, the graphics might not be as amazing as they were when they come out, but if you go back and play that game, you'll have that same emotional experience.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the games that I'm super glad did get an HD re-release. Pick it up. It fixes some of the few problems that the original did have with frame rate and some of the rest of it. Fantastic way to experience Shadow of the Colossus.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the reason why The Last Guardian has so much hype around it, is because it's like, you guys are 2 for 2. Like, we're still waiting. You know.
We actually, I mean, the last thing I would say about that is I really like to put a premium on games that do something new.
Sure.
And that game, nothing, you know, there have been games with big bosses before, but like you said, climbing on their back and just that sense of scale and the huge, like sometimes they stand up and you realize that they just tower above you. Nothing had ever felt like that, and nothing's felt like that since, except for games that are, you know, deliberately trying to ape Shadow of the Colossus.
Yeah.
Like it really kind of stands on its own, you know, on a pillar. Yeah. There were obviously lots of other interesting, incredible video games that came out that year, but there was a lot of interesting things happening in the world of TV and movies as well, including Sin City came out in 2005.
Yeah, that was crazy. It was insane how accurate a page-to-screen adaptation it was. I mean, Robert Rodriguez, you know, he worked very closely with Frank Miller on it, and that was sort of the introduction of his digital backlot, which is just like, hey, in my backyard, I have this green screen prison cell that I can bring all these, you know, this phenomenal cast, which the cast is incredible, from, you know, Mickey Rourke's sort of breakout performance, or breaking back into.
Elijah Wood being not Frodo.
Yeah, exactly. Jessica Alba, Bruce Willis, Clive Owen. It was, at the time, like with dumb high school or college Marty or whatever age I was then, like I was so enthralled by it. Like I thought it was just the coolest thing. Like that was the word that stuck out to me. It was just cool.
Yeah, I remember seeing it in the theater, and it just kind of felt like for having come off of Pulp Fiction, it almost felt like almost like a next step from that Tarantino school. Like it sort of, it was almost like the Tarantino in visual. It was like the visual equivalent of that leap.
Totally. Yeah, such a cool, just a really neat literal adaptation, which is different than one of the other adaptations. We're going to get to in a little bit.
I mean, I think it's interesting that if you look at any frame from that movie, it's instantly recognizable. Like its sense of style is wholly unique, and they very much, you talk about it being a literal adaptation, practically the comic book is the storyboards for the film. Like it's shot for shot, you know, angle for angle, it looks and feels exactly like the comic in a way that, you know, for better or worse, I don't know that any other comic book movie has ever really done or tried to do.
It didn't quite work the same
that's
way.
True. Yeah, that's super true. We also got Batman Begins this year.
Which I don't think people necessarily realized at the time how important that movie would be, but it's interesting that both that and Sin City came out in the same year. They're both literally dark movies. You know, it was a big change for comic book movies.
I was 8, I guess, when Tim Burton's Batman came out. I'd watched the Adam West stuff on Nick at Night reruns as a kid.
Sure.
And I became obsessed with Batman when the Tim Burton movies came out.
Yeah.
And then to have Schumacher come in and genuinely ruin I know this history of awesome, but to establish the context, he ruined the franchise.
Yeah.
It was done. I mean, I remember when George Clooney pulls out the Batman MasterCard and says, "Don't leave the Batcave without it." I literally wanted to leave the theater, and then that was it. The franchise was done for a number of years. There were rumors that Aronofsky was going to make Batman Year One.
Yeah, that's right.
There was a brief rumor of a Batman Beyond live action adaptation, but we ended up eventually getting the Christopher Nolan Batman Begins, and I remember seeing it, and the fans wanted Christian Bale cast as Bruce Wayne Batman. Got it, and that when I saw it, I couldn't go back and watch even the original Tim Burton '89 Batman again, because this had Begins just replaced it. It was just so much a better take on Batman than I'd ever seen before.
This is not a silly Batman movie.
No, I mean that's the big thing that Batman is one of the biggest things on planet Earth right now. So it's hard to forget that in 2005 when this came out, Batman was so uncool, and this movie was a huge gamble and wasn't a guarantee at all that it was going to be a success. And it sort of set the stage for any number of the dark and gritty, to the point that it's almost become a trope now that everything gets a dark and gritty reboot. Yeah. But it wasn't a trope when Batman Begins did it. It was just a really risky, sort of bold film.
And it really, I feel like, grounded those movies a lot, and that is why so many other movies would try to copy that, but for better or worse. I don't know if people necessarily wanted Superman Returns to be the dark, gritty Superman story.
Yeah, sure.
But it worked, and it connected with people who maybe weren't comic book fans, but did want to see a good, serious movie. And these characters are iconic. They're our mythology.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was insane that they gave the keys to this kingdom to Christopher Nolan, who at the time he did The Following and he did Memento, which Memento is incredible, but it's not one of those that guy should make a Batman movie kind of things. It was also Christian Bale's transformation in this movie was amazing because it came right off the heels of The Machinist, where he was like ostensibly dead.
He looked like me.
Yeah, and then he bulked up and screen tested for this role and absolutely crushed it.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was funny because both this and then the first Robert Downey Jr. Iron Man movie were the things that sort of set into motion everything that would go forward for both Marvel and DC.
Yeah,
do I look like a cop?
Yeah, I don't know about that Batman voice, but
yeah, the Batman voice is weird, especially when he uses it around people who he's using it to Alfred, and Alfred's like, "What are you doing?"
Yeah, I know who you are. I don't think the movie gets enough credit for actually being, pretty smart as far as just the way that it's scripted with Batman or Bruce Wayne sort of peeling back the criminal onion, and it starts with Falcone and then to Scarecrow and then eventually to the League of Shadows. In the climax of the movie, like sort of the escalation of the foes that he's tackling. I think that's escalation.
You now have to write it
down. I know.
Remember, and he doesn't become Batman until 45 minutes into the movie too.
Yeah.
There was a build-up that happened in that film.
Right. That's what I was gonna say. It's like the story, like Batman's origin story and doing comic book origin stories is so sort of played out now, but like the actual story of this rich kid experiencing a tragedy and then traveling all around the world to figure out how to sort of take back his city is good. Like that's a good, core story that at the time wasn't as tropey as maybe it is now.
Nice coat.
Yeah.
I could
And
do
if
this
you
all
look
day.
sort of at the color palette of both that and Sin City, I mean, we're used to very colorful, bright comic books, and that translated to the movies, but this is just it looks completely different than what we're used to.
It's also really good. I love the scene where he has to sort of be a douche. Like he has to be that playboy douche, and
he buys the hotel.
Yeah, and Maggie Gyllenhaal, or not, I guess it wasn't Maggie Gyllenhaal. It was Katie Holmes in that one, and she's like, "What are you You're awful." And he's like, "Oh God, I have to do this."
Yeah, it's one of the few examples of him showing, the sacrifices that he has to
that
make.
Bruce Wayne is the mask.
Yeah,
Right.
That's what that movie does that the other movies didn't really do a very good job of.
Absolutely. We also saw, it took a few years to sort of build up, but 2005 was the year that Doctor Who came back on television. It had been gone for, a decade, I guess.
Yeah, in any substantial way for a very long time. And, we're talking about gritty superhero movies, but this was sort of like the gritty Doctor Who comeback. Christopher Eccleston was angry. That was different. He had this tragedy. There was this new mythology we brought in his evolution over the course of that one season. Eccleston only had one season of Doctor Who, but, it was a very different Doctor, and it set the stage for sort of a lighter tone with David Tennant. But it really, I think, it was Eccleston that rebooted the franchise.
Well, sure. I think people that started with Doctor Who here might not understand that it used to be, it's actually sort of similar to Batman in that it used to be kind of this campy show, it was a half-hour long and, silly, and this guy goes on adventures and he can time travel, and it was kind of educational in some ways. That was the whole reason that he could time travel, was to, teach you about these different time periods. And they brought it back as an hour-long drama that was really, serious and tackled sort of heavy sci-fi issues, and against all odds, it worked. It's still going strong to this day.
Yeah, and it's a very different show now than it was in 2005 when
yeah.
it came back. But even so, I mean, people, if you're introducing yourself to Doctor Who now, I feel like a lot of people start either with Tennant or with Matt Smith. He really was what made it explode in the United States.
Yeah, they kind of skipped that first season. It is a little rough around the edges. I'd still like it, but some of the special effects, it's just obviously men in rubber suits, and the budget was not, anywhere what it would become.
That first episode too is maybe not the best representation of that season, but there are a couple episodes there that just pack an emotional punch, and I loved Russell T Davies as the showrunner there. I thought he did some really exceptional stuff.
And Rose is the new companion that's introduced. The Doctor always has to have a companion, if anybody doesn't know, and Rose is sort of a divisive character. Where do you fall on that?
I really like Rose. I mean, maybe it's the sap in me, but she became his love interest, and that carried over into the David Tennant seasons and really packed some major climaxes. She even came back in the 50th anniversary in her own way. I like Rose. I feel like you're at the other end of the spectrum, though, right?
Oh, Rose isn't my favorite. She's actually in the middle.
Who is your favorite?
I like Donna a lot.
Oh, Donna Noble. Dr. Donna.
I am so insanely confused right now.
Yeah, you guys can take it away.
You seem excited though, so I'm glad you guys are
Doctor Who is one of those things that has a fandom, right? And it's one of the early examples of sort of a deep fandom developing around a television show, and now we see that in stuff like Sherlock and Supernatural, and a lot of these shows have their own sort of fandoms. And Doctor Who, it's just I just think it's like I said earlier, everything old is new again, and nothing needs to go away forever, and I think that's really rad. We also got, it was a great year for sci-fi fans, because this is the year that Star Wars Episode 3 came out.
Which is so bizarre this year that we're going to be getting a new
7.
Star Wars movie again.
Yeah. It was sort of thankfully the end of the prequel trilogy, and it was, I think, I think most people would say it was the best of those three movies. It was also really dark, which is a weird thing. I went back and watched it recently, and I'm like, man, this is kind of a dark movie.
PG-13.
It's PG-13. He kills a bunch of kids. He gets his face burned off. Spoilers.
One was Jake Lloyd. 2 was Hayden Christensen
rolling down a hill.
But this one kind of started to pull it together a little bit, and there was some. I mean,
General Grievous seemed really
becoming
cool at times.
The transformation to Vader was really good in that
Brought
movie.
back James Earl Jones as Darth Vader.
I mean, it is, love or hate the prequel trilogy. I think it's interesting that you see this cute little boy, transform into a villain. That's pretty bold for arguably the biggest film franchise on Earth.
Killing the younglings. I just recently went back and revisited this movie, and that still is hard, because you're right, this is this guy, this kid who you like, and then where he is going to go. But actually seeing that, I think those 20 minutes of the movie, still love or hate the prequels, you can say they are really good.
Yeah, I mean, I still I get sort of I think it's super effective and emotional. The Order 66 or whatever, when the clone troopers finally turn on the Jedi, and when the Obi-Wan Anakin fight, and Obi-Wan just sort of breaking down at the end and leaving him for dead.
You were the chosen one!
Yeah. I mean, people make fun, they poke fun at it a little bit, right? But in the context of the film, you're totally invested and on board with what's happening on screen.
Had Chewbacca's, remember him?
It had that Chewbacca.
It was very good. Yeah, that was very accurate.
And it had the weird Emperor thing where he flipped over the chair. That was pretty dope.
And, for better or worse, this movie pretty much tied everything up to where we pick up in A New Hope. For some reason, Amidala felt that this was Luke and Leia were the perfect names for her children. We know why they ended up where they ended up. We see why Vader needed his,
his big old costume.
Yeah, a costume.
Accoutrement.
Yeah, his mask.
Yeah. So Terry, what's the story about you having a Star Wars marathon?
Okay, so friends, sorry, future friends, avoid this, but but I really like having marathons and big events building up to things that I care about.
Sure, you watch all 8 Fast and Furious movies before the next
Which
one
I
comes
still,
out.
I'm waiting for my Fast and Furious marathon. I'm building up to that.
Fast Fest.
Heaven help us all.
Heaven help us all. We're going to stay in this room and we're going to do it. We aren't leaving. So I gathered all my friends and I picked a friend's house and we stayed there for the entire weekend.
You gained squatters' rights.
We didn't even see the Friday night release because we were in school. So we waited until Sunday and from Saturday through Sunday, we watched the original 3 and then we watched the first 2. And then we all went to like a 10 a.m. showing of Revenge of the Sith. So we were very primed and ready. And
do you recommend that experience to people?
I had a great time. I wouldn't let my friends leave though. I was very militant about it.
I mean, this sounds like a Stanford prison experiment right now.
I have fond memories.
Are you going to
of
replicate
it.
that in December?
I actually just recently rewatched them, but yeah, why not? I'll lock all my friends in my house and not let them leave until they're done watching the prequel.
Learning a lot about you right now.
Nothing weird about that at all.
It's getting real weird. I personally, after seeing this movie, I was like, all right, well, I don't know if we'll ever get a Star Wars Episode 7.
That's exactly that's what stands out to me when I think back about my memories of Revenge of the Sith. It's like, Lucasfilm wasn't owned by Disney yet, and this was it. This was, the
and
original.
Lucas was done too.
Yeah,
he was like, all right.
The original trilogy came out, no more Star Wars. Finally, okay, we'll make the prequel trilogy. Then that was over, and no more Star Wars. We're done. We told the story.
I thought that was done. I thought it was over too.
And so that was, momentous. Like Star Wars is not the huge part of my life that it is for a lot of people my age, but I still enjoy the films and enjoy the mythology of it. And just a 6-film arc. Love or hate the prequels. Like there's kind of almost nothing else like it. It really sort of stands alone in that way.
I think that really helped open up the world too, because knowing that there was more out there, we had the expanded universe, we had the games, but revisiting the world of Star Wars so many years later, I think really made it a living, breathing fandom, and so there was a sense that there was more to learn always.
Yeah, and it's sort of easy to forget how big Star Wars is and how important it is to people. One of the days I remember the most working at IGN was the day that Disney bought Lucas.
That was
and it was
insane
and it's like, yeah, they're
day.
making 3 movies.
It was
and J.J. Abrams
very
is directing
emotional.
one.
Yeah,
just
very emotional day.
What is happening? And then leading on to when the first trailer came out, and then Star Wars Celebration, and all these IV drips we get about Rogue One and the anthology movies and
Disneyland, Star Wars Land at
we
Disney.
got BB-8s rolling around the office. And
God, I hope they're good.
yeah, that's the whole thing. Is it's like, God,
What if they're not good, guys?
I can't think like that.
There was obviously a lot of other awesome stuff that happened in 2005, but we do need to wrap this up. Stay tuned next week to History of Awesome 2006. We'll be talking about hot games like Gears of War and Oblivion and plenty more. So make sure you're keeping it locked right here to IGN.
Terry won't let me leave.